My name is Jean Tiberio, and I'd like to welcome you to Healing Outside the Box. Now, I thought I'd do the show a little differently today. This will be episode 296, and it's about branched-chain amino acids. Why are they essential, and why they may be associated with glucose intolerance and diabetes. This topic is a relatively short one, so I'm going to play a 5-minute promo of my audiobook memoir that just came out before I launch into the topic for this episode. After the audiobook sample plays, I'll then launch into the topic. Now, if after listening to the podcast, you might want to listen to the memoir, just message me in the comments section or DM me on Facebook or Instagram or wherever you're doing your DMing. Just type in my name to find me, and I'll send you a free coupon code for the audiobook until my samples run out. I still have a few left, but I can also get more. And if you'd like to write a review, I won't stop you. So enjoy the 5-minute sample of my audiobook called Helpers Anonymous.
Introduction. While sitting on a sidewalk one summer morning, mesmerized by an army of ants marching to and from their catch of the day, I had no idea that this might be a colossal waste of time. To be honest, I had planted that piece of saltine cracker on the sidewalk and patiently waited for them to arrive. In my defense, I was 6 years old at the time. In my opinion, a defense wasn't necessary. Now I'm not so sure that it was a waste of time at all. Since then, I've learned that being productive is necessary, but being content is important as well. Being productive and content is the cat's meow. Being productive and content while disabled is a challenge, but no less desirable. A huge part of my success in making my way in the world is a reliance on my caregivers. I'm proud to be a social animal, and I've had the support of so many terrific people. Family, of course, but also friends and many PCAs whom I would call my friends. I've also discovered that our fellow creatures, our experiences, and our spiritual leaders can teach us things if we're not too distracted to pay attention. So, this is also the story of my circular journey, adapting to and living with a disabling disease. I happen to be a disabled woman living with a neuromuscular disease. I was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy, unknown type, at the age of 27. Prior to that, I had been living my life as a clumsy, but otherwise healthy-looking woman. In 2017, a saliva test came back with a specific diagnosis of hereditary inclusion body myopathy. I have a genetic defect in the gene that codes for a protein that is necessary for muscle cells. Although I appear to be writing a memoir of my day-to-day life as a disabled woman, this is not meant to be a completely autobiographical work. If it were, then everything I write would have to be the complete truth, instead of my rambling opinions about what it's like to be a disabled woman, among other things. But I have a problem with the idea of the truth when it comes to creative art, writing, or movies. And there is a place for rambling opinions if the intention is to shed a light on uncomfortable truths in our society. I happen to be a left brain type and tended to lean towards math and science in school. In the math world, we know 2 + 2 = 4, all other numbers being false or untrue. But could the same be true for science? Maybe not, as it turns out. Not long ago, I was in the emergency room with chest pain, which gets you a bed quickly and an EKG just as quickly. The nurse, on her way out, left the EKG on the counter. The resident on call snatched up the EKG sheet, looked at it, and drew open the curtain. "Your EKG and monitor show a couple of abnormalities," he said. After explaining the abnormalities for a few minutes, he departed, leaving the EKG on the counter. 15 minutes later, a cardiologist, who didn't know the resident had been in to see me, picked up the EKG from the counter and approached me. "Your EKG looks just fine," he said, smiling. I gathered from all of this that the interpretation of any EKG, a black tracing on white paper of seemingly identical peaks and valleys, is not so black and white at all. If the same EKG tracing can be interpreted differently by experts, then the evaluation of art or literature should be the interpretation of the truth as seen by the artist or author. I had this discussion a few times with my sister, who is an artist. Once we were staring at a painting of a white canvas with black streaks across it. I asked, "Now what is this?" She explained that this artist was experimenting with color in these paintings. I could have argued that it seemed like an absence of color to me, but instead I launched into my man-faced dog story. In my 6th grade art class, we were given a lump of clay and told to make anything we liked. I was an animal lover and just adored our family mutt named Pepper. So I decided to make a replica of my dog. For reasons I couldn't explain at the time, I decided to put a human head on my dog. Now, I could explain in a lofty way that I saw my dog as human because I loved her as much or more than any human I knew. However, the teacher laughed out loud and gave me a C, the lowest grade she gave anyone who occupied a seat in her class. Well, okay. So, I should add this disclaimer. Although this work is technically a memoir, this is my interpretation of the events in my life. The names of some of the people I have encountered were changed for reasons that will appear obvious later. The dates of a few events may be off a bit. However, to the best of my ability, I've attempted to give a truthful account of my experiences adapting to and learning from my relationships with my caregivers.
Hey everybody, welcome to Healing Outside the Box once again. My name is, once again, Gene Tiberio, and today I'm going to discuss branched-chain amino acids. And I will get around to why you should care eventually. But first, let's define what they are. Now, all of the proteins in our bodies are made up of long links of amino acids tied together in a chain. Usually at least 200 amino acids in one of these links, and we call that a protein. Now, we have many different amino acids, and they are divided between essential and non-essential amino acids. The essential ones being the ones that we have to get from food, the others we can make in our bodies. There's either 9 or 10 essential amino acids, depending on how sick you are. The sometimes one is arginine, and it's needed with many chronic conditions. Since there may be about 1% of you who thinks this is interesting, I'll give you the rundown. We nutrition folks like to remember it as PVT-TIM-Hall. P is for phenylalanine, then valine, threonine, tryptophan, isoleucine, methionine, histidine, sometimes arginine, leucine, and lysine. The branched-chain amino acids are leucine, isoleucine, and valine, and they are all essential, so we must get them from food. So, why do we care? Over the past 20 years, scientists have been asking this question. Are high levels of branched-chain amino acids associated with weight gain and insulin resistance? As a side note, one of them, leucine, might be associated in a positive way with appetite control. So what's up with that? Now, I'm not sure the answer is, well, it depends, or, well, it's complicated. Either way, there is conflicting results, and there needs to be a lot more research to figure this out. In other words, it's not the amount of calories per se that makes people gain weight. It might be where the calories come from. There is one part from all these studies that seems to be apparently the case, and that is this. People did better in the studies when the protein source was plant foods versus animal foods, and the difference appeared to be branched-chain amino acids. In multiple studies, diabetics were put on the same calories, but were separated into 2 groups that were divided based on protein source. The first group ate a plant-based diet, and the second group ate an animal-based diet. So most of the protein came from animals in that second group. I'm sure they had some vegetables, because they did have to balance it out. The plant-eating group lost more weight with the same calories. The plant protein people, the PPPs, were also showing better insulin sensitivity, or less insulin resistance. Remember, both groups were already diabetics. It seems that if they ate a meal with similar calories, they did not get the same spike in blood sugar as the group eating animal proteins. By the way, this is a side note. Diabetes control and prevention of metabolic syndrome is also about where the fat is on our bodies. So it seems like the ability of diabetics to control the blood sugar is different between those who store fat under the skin versus the fat stored in the muscle. If someone stores fat between their muscles, they had more insulin resistance and less control of their diabetes. Don't ask me how they figured that out, but they did. When they studied the diabetics who were plant-eating people, their fat on their bodies seemed to be distributed differently. They had less fat woven into their muscle cells. Now, although we are concerned about the fat that we can see in the mirror, this internal fat is important to the control of chronic diseases, associated with our Western diet. That was just a side note about the fat. Now back to the protein. So protein type matters, and we still don't know why or how, but it seems to matter. There was improved blood sugar control when the source of the protein was mostly plants. Not all plants, but mostly. In another study, they put people on a weight loss diet to achieve a 10% weight loss. In other words, you would be going, say, from 200 pounds to 180 pounds. And that was associated with improved glucose control. But the group eating mostly animal protein did not necessarily see the same benefits to their insulin resistance in glucose levels with the same 10% weight loss versus people eating plant proteins. Are the plant people getting benefits from the plants other than the protein? We don't know yet. And you might assume that people who eat lots of animal protein may have other risk factors. Curing meats, smoking meats, etc. add an additional risk factor because of the smoking process. So they did a randomized controlled study looking at just the source of protein in diabetics, plants versus animals. But in that study, the results were inconclusive. So I don't know. Some scientists believe the differences, if any, might have something to do with branched-chain amino acids. As we discussed, the branched-chain amino acids are leucine, isoleucine, and valine, and they're all essential. These branched-chain amino acids are highly concentrated in animal protein, but not plant protein. They theorize that these may be associated with obesity and insulin resistance, but the reasons for why or how are unclear. One study reported that decreased consumption of branched-chain amino acids from animal protein improves metabolic health. On the other hand, leucine, in some studies, has a positive effect on appetite suppression, which would seem to be a good thing. Then they repeated the study and got different results. In another study, they just looked at protein-restricted people in general. They found out that if the protein amount is lowered and contains more plant protein versus meat protein, there was more weight loss, even though the people ate more calories overall. The amount of protein in that study was about 56 grams per day, which is fine in my opinion. I'm not sure why we are calling that a protein-restricted diet, but with Americans, it appears to be. there's yet another study from NIH, and the title is The Emerging Role of Branched-chain Amino Acids in Insulin Resistance and Metabolism. The problem is, why insulin resistance happens is still a bit of a mystery. Here's a quote from that study. Quote, "Even though branched-chain amino acids have been reported to improve metabolic health, an increased branched-chain amino acid level is associated with a high risk of metabolic disorder and future insulin resistance, or type 2 diabetes mellitus." Here's another quote further down. Quote, "In addition, defective branched-chain amino acid oxidative metabolism might occur in obesity, leading to a further accumulation of branched-chain amino acids and toxic intermediates." End quote. That last quote might be where we find the answer. It might not be branched-chain amino acids as they are, but defective branched-chain amino acid oxidative metabolism. That makes more sense to me. But the truth is that we still don't know for sure. Here comes another quote. "Whether branched-chain amino acids are simply markers of insulin resistance, or whether they are direct contributors to insulin resistance remains uncertain." End quote. So that's where we are. Patients with type 2 diabetes have higher blood levels of branched-chain amino acids than those without diabetes. Here's another quote. "Altered gene expression caused by either mutations or epigenetic regulation affects all the enzymatic activities of branched-chain amino acid metabolism." End quote. And in the end, they say, quote, "Hence, the role played in metabolism by high levels of branched-chain amino acids warrants further study." End quote. Yeah, I think we got that. Plants better than animals. Marbling not good for us or the cow. The rest is complicated. When it becomes less complicated, hopefully they'll let us know, and I'll let you know. That's all I have for you today. Be well, and stay tuned for another episode of Healing Outside the Box.